Hello, Kenku. I've been thinking a lot about cow paths. Also known as desire paths or desire lines, these routes are both intentionally and completely unintentionally made. Colloquially named after the dirt paths that form from herds of cattle following the same easiest means between two desired locations, people create them too. In recent years, cow paths have become a major tool for urban planners and architects. In large campuses such as universities, a lot of effort and money goes into having nice greens around and in between buildings. Beautiful sidewalks are made to navigate them and maintain the greens. Despite this, students and faculty will still cause large dead ruts of dirt to appear through the grass. If you have to walk between the same two buildings every day, a straight line through the green saves time versus walking around. Whatever the architect of the space had intended for actual usage, people will do what people will do. To combat this, campuses will advertise that they have studied what the student migrations want before they pave over the cow paths that follow these desire lines to make them look nicer. The architects of the spaces, the designers of them, have begun to build this into their designs, a mixture of what they intend for the aesthetics of the campus with how they will actually be used. Recently, Wizards of the Coast has begun their process of test playing the next version of D&D. We are currently 2 test play documents into OneD&D. My thoughts on cow paths on desire lines have guided me through interpreting these documents. I want to take a moment to present one way of thinking about what the designers are doing. Like an architect merging aesthetic choices and desire lines, OneD&D's game designers are doing more than rebalancing abilities and streamlining 8 years of power creep. As a reminder, game design in role-playing games is the art of crafting the experience of the game through the rules. The rules determine how the game is played, what is expected, what is facilitated, and what is hindered. While RPGs have the freedom of changing rules on the fly, or ignoring them entirely, those edits are not the core experience of the game. Everything the designers put or don't put into the rules tells the player what kind of story is being aimed for. The more intricate the fighting mechanics, the more the game is about mastering those details. The order of operations on a turn influences how the story of a given turn develops. Equally, the restraints on what an ability is and isn't allowed to do highlights what that game mechanic is meant to represent. The rules of a game are how the designers tell the players about the experience. Some games are extremely specific on what they are conveying to the player, while others remain loose with plenty of room for interpretation without overstepping anything that the game designers established. In either case, the rules are communication. With communication comes miscommunication. No matter how comprehensive a rulebook, it can't contain everything, and if it did, you wouldn't be able to find what you needed in the mess. In the end, miscommunications will happen. For a game as big as 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, fixing those miscommunications is difficult when you have such a scale of the player base. They have attempted clarifications, whether that is with social media like Sage Advice or with errata that can be published. Despite that, those efforts are bound by restraints to fix them. With social media, they are limited to clarifying rules based on the exact words in the book. You can't change anything, just show through published examples what was meant. For errata, the clarifications are limited to tweaking what exists. In many cases, it is human error of typos or poor grammar. Larger errata serves more as backstepping, either censoring content or trying to fix poor design that doesn't fit the balance of the rest of the game. The larger the errata, the greater chance for negative feedback to the change. What ties all of these examples together, though, is they represent mistakes, whether on the part of the writer or the reader. Either the publisher communicated something that they shouldn't have, or the consumer failed to holistically digest the content. But what happens when the communication just completely missed? When the game designer has an idea and decides on the words to communicate it, but the receiver of those words has a completely different picture painted for them than what was initially intended. The designer still wants to convey the mechanics for said idea, but doing so can't be done like the other miscommunications. Clarifications won't work because the text already failed to do its job. Errata isn't an option because the problem isn't fixed with rearranging a sentence or removing. It's not there. The design missed its mark. In this case, you need a new design to take a second shot at painting the right picture. In my opinion, this is what I believe OneD&D to be. Wizards of the Coast has maintained a strong stance that they aren't making a new 6th edition of D&D, but building upon and improving 5th edition. While there is a ton of gray zone, and as a company they have a publicity team that needs to satiate both current and future markets, what they have presented thus far is attempts at a redesign. They are taking the same core ideas they have already had and are trying to rebuild the game to better portray them. Keep the things that hit their marks and change the things that fail to say what they were meant to say. Viewing the OneD&D testplay documents through this lens allows for us to understand why they are making the changes they are. Everything added is for a reason. Everything removed is for a reason. Instead of seeing what is given or stolen in these new versions, reading and playing with the intent of understanding what greater idea they are trying to convey is the key to understanding the designer's actions. Yes, the new designs will include the changes in errata that have slowly built over time, but more so, it will try to fix the ideas that failed to be communicated at all and address them. Looking at the overall shapes of the new designs being presented over the first 2 testplay documents, I see 2 modes that they are taking to try to convey the ideas that they failed to communicate in the first place. The first mode is to throw multiple new designs out to brute force a solution. They have a core idea, and they will interpret it into a game design as many times as it takes for the player experience to feel the idea they are trying to make. This can be seen with the mechanics around inspiration. The second mode of new design is to give up on their own concept of an idea, and embrace the version that the players had interpreted in place of their own. This can be seen in the new version of the guidance cantrip. In the end, both of these modes are meant to line up a strong idea with matching mechanics. The difference is whether they are finding the mechanics that convey the idea that they want, or accepting the misinformed consumer's idea and building mechanics to match what the consumer wants to interpret. Let's take a look at both of them in turn. First up, let's look at the D&D game designers having a strong idea that they wanted to convey and finding mechanics to better convey it. Inspiration is a mechanic that allows a player to give themselves advantage on a D20 roll or to remove disadvantage. Inspiration can be used before a roll is made to increase the likelihood of success. In essence, it is a mechanic that allows players, regardless of their character's abilities or stats, to greatly increase their chances of doing anything that they wanted. D&D is meant to be a high fantasy, pulpy adventure, and the intended mechanic is to give the player the ability to choose moments that they personally want to succeed, a better chance of doing so. They wanted players to be using inspiration throughout the game. Unfortunately, it didn't play out that way. In order to get inspiration, a DM would have to give it out as a reward, typically for players role-playing into their flavored character traits. Essentially, it was a carrot to try to encourage players of a role-playing game to role-play. To be honest, before I became a professional GM, I didn't use inspiration because of that. It felt odd needing to incentivize people to play the game that they chose to play. It felt like giving out free money in Monopoly for buying property. I was not the only GM who felt this, and because of that, inspiration didn't catch on as much as they had hoped. Inspiration became a rare thing, and with it being rare, players wouldn't use it. They would save it for a key moment that might never come. Now, with OneD&D, they are experimenting with inspiration. In the first test play, humans start with it every day, and players gain inspiration as a part of rolling a natural 20. It acts as a form of momentum for the players. However, it must also be spent before the end of the day because it goes away on a long rest. In the second test play, they moved it from nat 20s to nat 1s as a means of cushioning fumbles and preventing death spirals. They have already announced that a future test play will have everyone starting with inspiration like the human does at the beginning of the day. All of these designs carry their own subtle flavors with them, but they are all a part of a design that is to encourage pulpy, higher action play where players get and spend inspiration more often, allowing for more daring stories through the process. The designers have a strong idea of what they want in the game, and are going through many iterations of design to find the mechanics that players grab onto and understand the idea being conveyed to them. The designers are attempting to facilitate the kind of play they desire to happen. That is our first angle for the redesign. The game designers aren't so hubristic as to say it's their way or no way, though. In other areas, they are looking at the original design and seeing what players are trying to do with it. Keep in mind that the mechanics of a game determine what is meant to happen, what is supposed to be possible. If the game designers give you a car, it isn't meant to be used like a submarine. Despite that, many players may attempt to use it like a submarine and then get frustrated when it doesn't work. In this case, the game designers are looking at what players are actually doing, giving up on their own intended idea, and designing mechanics that fit with what the players want within reason. The example that struck me most for this is the new design for the guidance cantrip in the second OneD&D test play. We'll look at what guidance is, what I believe the core idea of the mechanics intended to be, how players actually used it, and how the redesign is made for the players and not the original idea. Guidance is a cantrip that allows the touched target to roll an additional 1d4 to add to one of their ability checks in the next minute. The core idea of this ability is that a divine character can take a moment to reach out to a holy or spiritual presence to aid them. It is essentially a moment of quick prayer asking for help in something that they or a companion is about to do. There is reverence, deliberate intentionality, and it is for something that has not yet happened. In play, though, guidance is seen as a free bonus to half of all the die rolls in the game. It's a bonus d4. Why wouldn't you want it? It's a cantrip. You can use it as much as you want, right? About to pick a lock? Guidance. Tracking down a black market salesman through the afternoon? You get some guidance. Trying to sneak out of a bandit camp? How about some guidance? Ask the DM a question if their character knows about the specific court of fairies around this remote village and you need to roll for it? Everybody gets some guidance! But that doesn't match the core idea of the game. Most of the time, the thought for guidance comes after the roll is asked for. Some of the rolls aren't even deliberate things, just the random chance tool to see if you know something. Some of them would require the representation of hours of work well outside the minute the spell is meant for. Is the caster following you around just belting out praise to their god the entire time? The core idea that inspired the cantrip doesn't match what the players want out of it. But is that a bad thing? Half of an RPG is the game, and of course we want any bonus we can get. The spell is meant to be useful even though not all roles players have the choice to prepare for. But aren't ability checks meant to be deliberate? Saving throws are the sudden, unplanned for rolls. So shouldn't I be able to guidance an ability check even if I didn't personally know whether the GM would ask for a roll or just tell me the information? OneD&D's current response is to change the mechanics to better fit how players want to use guidance rather than the original idea. Guidance is now a reaction with a range of 30 feet rather than an action to touch the target. Rather than having to guidance everything to feel like it's useful, you now only choose to guidance someone who has failed an ability check to try to help them succeed. However, any one person can only benefit from guidance once in any given day, requiring a long rest before they can gain the benefit again. Rather than spamming it because you don't know when the GM is going to ask for a roll, it is held for when it is needed. The core idea is no longer reverential praise asking for aid on something about to be done. Now it is that moment at the precipice of failure where a priest's deity smiles upon them. It is the moment where you are unsure of what is about to happen, and faith wins the day. Do I like the original idea better? Yes. Does the new test play design match how players attempt to use it? Also, yes. And whatever my preference for flavor, I prefer a design that facilitates how people interpret the rules. Flavor is hard to maintain if I have to explain why something mechanically doesn't work 90% of the time. Here, the spell has been mechanically redesigned to meet the player's desired use for the spell rather than fighting them on it. All game design is about desired use. Usually it is about the writers attempting to design a system to get you to play the game how they want you to. There is nothing wrong with changing the rules or developing your own, but at the core, it is in following the design of the game that the intended experience is fully shown. It is in the redesign that any failures of this communication are dealt with. In some cases, it is admitting that what was said did not paint the intended picture and trying again. In other cases, it is realizing that the consumer doesn't see what you do and deciding to go with their picture instead. The power may be in the designer's hands, but that doesn't mean that everything has to go their way. RPGs are dialogues. The core of the game is seeing where the two different sides of the screen come together. In this case, some redesigns say, "No, I meant this." Other redesigns say, "Oh, you saw that?" The balance of these two modes is what is hidden behind the screen in this process of developing OneD&D. This is my SendingKenku. Miscommunications are neither made nor fixed by one party. It's just as important to understand what one side heard as what the other side said.